Welcome to Paranormal the New Normal. I am your host, Jeremy Bryant, as always. And my guest today has a very unique story, which I am dying to hear. And pun not intended on that. But today, my guest is Kellan Flukiger.
Hi. Thank you for having me here. Grateful to have the opportunity to talk about something that a lot of us never think about, you know?
Yeah, it's definitely not something I've really put too much thought into, but since hearing stories like yours lately, I've definitely been putting thought into it somewhat.
Yeah, it's never something you plan to have happen, right? But it's one of those things.
Basically, so why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself before we get into your story?
Okay, great. I had a long career in the energy business, 30 years, and lots of career positions, including C-level stuff in the US and Canada, electricity, utilities, deregulation, some government stuff, some private industry stuff. In 2007, after 30 years in that business, I left that industry entirely, and I had a sort of a really dramatic departure because of some struggles going on in my own life, and just left it entirely and started over. I started life creating a coaching practice. I also became an author. So since 2007, I've written like 16 books and I built a coaching practice and was going along well after this dramatic, I call it a divine intervention, but it's not the same. It was, but it's not the same as the NDE we're talking about. After going along, building that business and doing, and it was based on, um, you know, a connection with spirit, and it just kind of hope and spirit based coaching. But that's what I was doing, and I was doing it well, and I had a good practice for about 11 years. 11 years after that first event, which was not an NDE, but was a dramatic thing. I got ill and became sick and went to the hospital and died, and that's what we'll talk about in 2018. So this month is the 4-year anniversary. It happened on June 5th, 2018. Since then, my focus hasn't changed. I built my coaching practice more. I wrote a couple of books about the experience and some others since then. So I've written a total of 16. It didn't change my focus in terms of my commitment to our divine nature and doing good, adding good to the world, which is really the focus that I have. But it certainly strengthened it and gave me a sense of perspective and an experience that I never imagined in any world that I would have. I'd heard about such things before. So I'm a coach, I'm a people encourager. I came from an executive career. Today I focus on helping people who are committed to ending addiction to mediocrity and are committed to being the best that they can be.
Oh, I like that. That's a good thing because I mean, no one should be mediocre. Everybody should be the best that they can at what they want to do.
And very few are.
Yes, and I mean, I myself am trying to become past the mediocre podcaster stage to become a world famous podcaster, but we'll get there someday. Hopefully, it's still
Of
rare.
course you will. I have every confidence.
Yeah, it's still a new thing, so it grows. But already getting sponsorships somewhat, so it's starting to start.
Good on you. God, thank you for doing what you do. I love, you told me, you blew me away to start with. I said, oh, got you in the podcasting business. He said, oh, I have 5. I'm like, okay, because podcasting's really a labor of love. I mean, you might get sponsorships and stuff, but for a large part, it's something that you're doing out of passion. And I use the phrase add good to the world, trying to help people understand things, encourage things, learn things, and that sort of thing. And so I really appreciate the work you're doing.
I thank you. I appreciate being appreciated, but it's 100% labor of love. My listeners do know I love this podcast and I love talking about paranormal, supernatural things. And your experience is a supernatural thing, and 100% because it's of a divine nature in a way, as you said. So, why don't you tell us about that fateful event in 2018?
Okay. Well, after I'd been working on my coaching business, um, to do it justice, it might be best if I told what happened in 2007, even though that wasn't the NDE, because that kind of set it up. And
If
is
you
that okay?
Yeah, yeah, if you want to. I just didn't want to push anything you didn't want to
No,
talk
no,
about.
nothing's off the table. One of the things I wrote after I got changed is I wrote a book about myself called Tightrope of Depression, my journey from darkness, despair, and death to light, love, and life. And I, told a lot of stories and open and transparent stuff in there, which talks about the battles that I'd had. I was uh, raised in an abusive home, physically abusive, under the guise of religion, and I got a lot of discipline that today would be felony child abuse. And we would have been removed. I would have been removed from the home. And what it did to me is I came away with a certainty that I wasn't good enough and that I never would be, and that my entire focus of my adult life needed to be proving to my mom that I was okay and getting back into her good graces. And you'd think that, when you leave home, you'd get out of that, but I didn't, because it was sort of religion based. And in order to be a good boy and all the rest, I had to do this. I had to be what she wanted. So it's funny because I had the juxtaposition of not being good enough, but at the same time, I was blessed with a lot of brains and I had capabilities. So I would create successful career things and make good money, and then I would sabotage them because I didn't deserve this. And I did that over and over again, literally for decades. I never talked to anyone. I never got any help. I did the stupidest thing. I kept it all closed inside, and that went on for 35 years. So from the time I left home at 17 until I was 52, which was 2007, which is what we're going to talk about, the first part, I lived a roller coaster life of creating huge success and then sabotaging it, and then even bigger success and sabotaging and bigger success. And by success, I mean high-powered corporate positions, C-suite positions. And in 2007, by 2007, three things were true. Number one, had been married and divorced 3 times. I had 10 kids, and 4 of them were living with me as teenagers, and 3 were grown up and married, and 3 were living with, it's embarrassing to say, but one of my exes. And I was making so much money that my $3,000 a week cocaine habit didn't matter. So I was a total wreck. I was one of those movie things. It's like on the outside, it's like, whoa. And behind the scenes, it was a disaster, a battleground, a mess. I came home from work one day in August of 2007 on a Friday night. I was getting ready to go out and party for the weekend. And the 4 kids that were with me were teenagers, and so they were not home a lot anyway and took care of themselves. So it's like, yeah, whatever. And before I went out to party, I had this urge to turn on the television. Now, that doesn't sound like anything, except I didn't watch TV. And the funny part was I picked up the remote and I looked at it and I realized I didn't know how to turn it on. I'd had the electronics guys come and put in the coolest stuff you could buy, because when you make a lot of money, you do that, right? But I looked at it and I'm like, I don't know how to turn this on. So I asked one of my kids, my 16-year-old daughter, if she punched some buttons and threw the remote at me like dipweed and stomped out. It landed on a program that I'd never heard of, but I'd never heard of any of them because I literally was not a TV watcher, and it was called Intervention. Now, if that's a reality TV show about, people that stage interventions for busted loved ones, but I'd never heard of it. So I'm like, what? And the protagonist was a high-ranking executive with a cocaine problem, right? So I watched about 10 minutes of this, and I'm like, yeah, screw this. I'm not watching it. So I turned it off and went and did some other stuff for a few minutes, and then I was going to go out. And I just was compelled to turn the TV back on. So this time I knew how. I turned it on, and that program started over. And no, I don't have a DVR. I don't have a recording device. No, it wasn't on the schedule. And no, it can't do that. I understand, but it did. And I'm like, oh, crap. I guess I'm supposed to watch this. It freaked me out. So I sat down and watched it. And it went really bad. The guy yelled at his relatives, swore he didn't have a problem, stomped out, and it went poorly. So it freaked me out enough that I didn't go out. I went to bed. And when I went to bed, I went to hell. What I mean by that is I went somewhere. I don't know where it was, but it felt out of body. So I'm in a big, dark theater, and I could hear voices and scenes were playing on the stage, and they were scenes from my life, but not flashing before my eyes, but slowly. And it was focused on suffering. And it started with suffering that had been inflicted on me as a kid, abuse and everything, but also all the suffering I had inflicted on others as an addict and as a terrible marriage partner and just all this stuff. And the thread of suffering was so consistent and intense, I don't possess the language to describe the intensity of the experience of watching that. And it went on for a long time. After a long time, there was a voice that simply said, "It is enough." And it wasn't yelling or loud, it is enough. I woke up and the sun was shining in the window, which was weird because the windows faced west. So I got up and realized it was 5 o'clock Saturday afternoon. So I'd been somewhere for nearly 18 hours. And I got up and realized, okay, I've been invited to change. I have no idea how to do this. I have no idea what I'm doing. I'd never talked to a counselor or anything in all my years, and I'm 52 years old. But what I knew is, okay, something has to change. We're done. So I got up and I threw away $1,000 worth of stuff that I had laying around, and I quit cold turkey that day. $3,000 a week to zero in one day. So that got me sober. It didn't do anything with the stuff, the purpose, the depression, the self-loathing, the negativity that got me where I was. And that was the other shoe that fell 2 weeks later. So Monday, I went back to work and sober, stone cold sober, like holy crap. And I used to get free stuff in the job that I had because I had a high-ranking position. And so CEOs and stuff from other companies would gift me things, tickets to this, expensive bottles of booze, and like I needed more of that. And because people wanted to be nice to me, whatever, not bribes, but just free stuff. And so one of the things I got was a pair of tickets to see a Yo-Yo Ma concert.
Ooh.
Now, if you know classical music, you know who that is. And if you don't, that's fine. But in classical world, I was like, ah! So I'm like, okay, this is cool. And I thought, oh man, I'm single. I don't have anybody to take. It'd be a terrible shame to waste this other ticket. So I asked in the groups that I managed who likes classical music. And some lady in one of the groups said, well, I do. And I said, okay, have I ever given you anything before? Because I gave away stuff all the time. And she said, no. I said, okay, fine, see you there. So I gave her the ticket. We met at the venue. The concert was spectacular. And halfway through, you got to know, I'm 2 weeks now, 2 weeks, stone cold sober. So I'm at the concert. Halfway through, I had this feeling come over me that I recognized from 2 weeks before. And a voice said to me, you need to marry this woman. And I said, you're insane. I don't know if she has a boyfriend. She can have me arrested for harassment. She works in one of my groups, and I've screwed this up 3 times already. There's no way. I've been divorced 3 times and some other messes. It's not happening. So later that night, we were backstage because, of course, they were backstage passes also. And the voice came back and said, yeah, comma, and you need to tell her tonight. And I just went crazy. I said, no, that's just not happening. And so I argued, but you don't win those arguments. So I did, and it went about like you would have expected. Are you out of your mind? She didn't have a boyfriend, and she didn't call the cops. So yay for 2 things. But she told me, are you insane? What are you talking about? Like, we don't even know. And so within the next 2 weeks, she had her own set of experiences. And so 2 weeks later, she resigned her position that she'd had for many years. She was a project manager. She had a good career. I walked away from millions of dollars of contracts, and we walked off into the sunset together. And about 6 months ago, we celebrated our 14th wedding anniversary. Now, the reason that's interesting in the setup for the other thing is, number one, it's just amazing. But number two, she was literally the angel that was sent to help me to learn how to be a person, to learn how to talk to somebody, learn how to have a friend, to be a friend. Like I didn't know anything about that. I'd never told the truth in any relationship to myself or anyone else. And that might seem strange, being married and divorced 3 times. And one of the times was for many years, like 15 years. But I wasn't. I didn't know how to have a regular friendship, relationship, anything. So she was relentless in finding me people to talk to and, helping me deal with this depression and this whole mess that I'd made out of life. And I've asked her 1,000 times, like, what on earth possessed you to walk off into the sunset with a drug addict? I mean, nobody knew, but they all knew, right? The rumors. And she said, I don't know. I just knew to the core of my soul it was the right thing to do. So that was the setup. And so for the next 10 years, for the first 3 or 4, we got to know each other and all that sort of stuff. But we just did that. And she helped me build this coaching practice. Today, she's my business partner. She runs all of our back end stuff, does all the software, all the online things like ClickFunnels and all of that business.
Yeah.
So she was that was the setup. And so for 10 years, 11 years, we built this coaching practice. 11 years later, it's 2018 now, we decided to go on a cruise. We'd never been on a cruise before. Hadn't been something either one of us had ever done. So we went to the Baltic Sea, and it was a 10-day cruise. At the end of the cruise, I got sick. And we're in Oslo, Norway, and on Monday, and that was day 1. And the day numbers will matter here later. And then we flew to Amsterdam, day 2, and flew home on Tuesday, which was day 2. I was really sick on the plane, fever and everything. And today, if I was that sick, they'd have thrown you out the plane.
Yeah,
window.
I was going to say, I'm like, thank God it wasn't a couple years later.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would have been out the window, right? And then those days, they just brought you ice and took care of you, right? Anyway, so we got home on Tuesday night, and it turns out I wasn't contagious anyway, but I didn't go to we live in Canada. We're dual national, U.S. and Canada, but we were in Canada at the time. I didn't go to the walk-in clinic on Wednesday or Thursday. I kept thinking it was going to get better, but it didn't. It got worse and worse. Finally, on Friday, which was day 5, I went to the walk-in clinic, and there was a sign in the clinic that I knew was there because I'd been there before. It was one in the neighborhood that said, if you have a cough or something, let the nurse know. So I sent my wife, I didn't tell you that amazing, miraculous thing about my wife. Her name is Joy. Like, you can't make this stuff up.
No,
right?
you can't. You can't.
All right. So Joy went into the clinic and told the nurse I had a cough, and she came out and took a look at me, and she took one look at me and said, you can't come in here. You have to go to ER. There's nothing we can do for you here. Get out of here. Not good. So we drove to the emergency room, and you go to emerge, might be an hour or 2 or even 3 if they're busy and all that sort of stuff. Hi there. Depending on how busy they are. So I expected to be there a while. And in 10 minutes, I was in a private room. I didn't even know they had private rooms in emergency. The only thing I'd ever seen was those curtain partitions, right?
Yeah.
I'm in a private room with a door. I'm like, oh, man. And 10 minutes later, the doctor's in there, and they're all over me. And I'm like, holy crap, this is not good. So they start doing tests and x-rays and MRIs and all this stuff. And pretty soon they came back and said, yeah, we're going to admit you in the hospital. We don't know what's wrong, but you're coming here. So I sent Joy home because we have dogs and cats and things. And I said, we'll come back tomorrow, Saturday morning, and we'll figure out, what's going on, whatever. So it started getting worse really fast. They came back after a while and took me up to a room. And then they came back a little while later. Doctor came back and said, yeah, I'm afraid we're probably going to have to move you to the ICU. Okay. And they came back a little while later. Yeah, we think we're going to put you in biological isolation.
Oof.
That's like hazmat suits and double doors and airlock. I'm like, holy crap. Okay. And then about a little before midnight, they came back and asked the question you never want to hear. And the doctor came in and said, do we have permission to intubate you and do anything we need to do to preserve your life? I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Okay. So then I went into meditation. It's a practice I've had all my life since I was a teenager. And as I went into meditation, after a while, I could feel that my body and spirit were separating. It felt like a zipper. I could feel it coming apart, and I thought, holy crap. By that time, I was shaking. I was physically crashing, and I took my phone and I sent Joy a text. She was asleep because it was midnight, almost nearly midnight. And I got 3 lines out. First line said ICU. The second line, they hadn't moved me yet, but they were going to ICU. The second line said isolation/intubation. And the third line said I may be dying. She didn't see it. And shortly after that, I crashed. Code green, blue, red, pink, whatever it is.
Blue. Code
Yeah.
blue.
Code blue.
I watch a lot of medical shows, so yeah.
All right. So that happened. And a little while later, Joy got the phone call you never want to get. And the nurse said to her, it's like 2 or 3 in the morning, are you coming? And she said, what? And then she saw my text, right? So somewhere in there, my heart stopped and I died. I was in a coma for about 17 days. But after my heart stopped, I died. I came to energetically, spiritually, and I was laying down like I was on the stretcher, and I sat up, and the room was gray. So like photo card gray. The walls and the ceiling and everything were just gray. It was a very soft gray. And I really couldn't.
Like a flashback scene in a TV show, kind of.
Yeah, it was all gray.
Yeah.
Everything was gray. And I was sitting up, and I couldn't really tell how big the room was because it was all gray, but I looked over my left shoulder and there was a door over there. And it didn't have a door in it, but it was a doorway. You know, a door jamb is a doorway.
Yeah.
And so I looked over there and I had this desire to be at the door. So then I was at the door and I was leaning against the door jamb on my right shoulder. And my side of the door was gray, and I noticed the other side of the door was white. It wasn't streaming through, it was just white on that side and gray on my side. And I noticed that there was someone on the other side leaning on that door jamb, like right there, across the door jamb. And he looked at me and he said, do you want to come home? And like only in those kinds of places, I knew where I was, I knew what the door was, I knew who I was talking to, I knew everything. And the question hit me like a ton of bricks, although it was just there. And there was no expectation about how to answer it, but there was also no question that it needed an answer. And so we talked for a while, and I thought about all the stuff I'd done for the last 11 years, nearly. The other one happened in August. This was June, so not quite 11 years. And I thought, you know, I've done all these things, and I've so much more that we planned to do. And everything we'd done, we just talked about it for a long time. And finally I said, I'm not done. He said, okay. And I'm quite sure that that's when they were able to restart my heart.
Yeah.
Even though I didn't come out of the coma, I'm quite sure that's when they were able to restart my heart. So that was the first of 3 conversations. The next day, and people often ask, how did you know it was the next day? And the answer is, I have no idea. You just know that. Okay, so the next day, we're back at the door, and we're talking again, and this time the question of the previous day didn't come up. That was answered. And so he said, well, okay, you're going to stay, so what are you going to do? And like you said, you had more to do. What are you going to do? So we talked about my coaching practice and who I was trying to help and what I was trying to be in the world and all that stuff. And we talked about it at length. And in terms of purpose and mission and all that kind of thing. And then I had an experience that the best way I can describe it is if you've seen that Jodie Foster movie called Contact.
I haven't. It's on my list of things to watch because I'm a huge pet person for those movies. But
yeah, so you haven't seen it yet.
No, I've heard many good things about it, though.
Anyway, the aliens tell us how to build a spaceship, and we do. And it's not a spaceship; it's a thingy. And then this vessel drops through some kind of a weird field. Bottom line is, Jodie Foster's taken on a trip through the universe inside this ball. And I use that analogy just because that's the only thing I've ever seen that feels like it. I felt like I was inside of some kind of a protective bubble. I felt like I was on a trip. And I felt like if I hadn't been in that protective bubble, I would have been incinerated. And I felt like I was being fed with a fire hose, and infused with sights and sounds and knowledge and just this glorious panorama of knowledge and sights and sounds and things, just the universe in all of its splendor. And when that was finished, and I don't know how long it felt like a long time. I was back at the doorway, and four things were, lots of stuff happened, but four real important principles were really clear to me. And it wasn't new things, but it was an affirmation in a way that is incomparable. And the four things are this. Number one, each one of us, every single person, is an intentional and divine creation. We're here on purpose, created to be here, period. Number two is that each of us was in fact given gifts, talents for our experience here. Number three is that we also have a mission, purpose, that we not only agreed to, but we were stoked about before we came. And number four is that all the help we need is available from both sides of that door. And I thought about that for a while, and I said, well, since that's true, why do we settle for crumbs?
I like that. I like that.
Why do we settle for crumbs? And I don't know if in the economy of heaven, brevity is a virtue, but the answer was 4 words. Because you don't believe. And it hit me like a ton of bricks, and I thought, facepalm, duh, I didn't say that. Okay, and I said, all right, what can I do? What can I do to help with that? Oh, glad you asked. So what followed then was a long conversation, revelation about how it's possible to change the beliefs we have. Like we live in what I call each of us lives in a context straitjacket. And what I mean by that is the context is how we think life works. It's a collection of our beliefs and definitions and experiences and expectations and perceptions. And I love acronyms, so I created an acronym called Be Deep. So your Be Deep creates this context straitjacket, and it governs what you try, what you think is possible, what you think you can have, and all that stuff in your life. And so the whole point of this part of the conversation was to share a way to change those fundamental beliefs so that you are able to believe different things, more empowering things, and then participate more fully in that mission and purpose you agreed to. Anyway, so when I got done with this whole experience, which I'll finish, I wrote Meeting God at the Door, which is the primary book, Conversations, Choices, and Commitments of a Near-Death Experience. And then I wrote the companion book called The Book of Context, because the rest of that second conversation was, number one, too long and kind of off topic for the whole experience itself. So I wrote them as companion books, and it's called, not surprisingly, The Book of Context. And it was funny because when I wrote The Book of Context, I had a client who's a retired physician in Baltimore. I asked him to write the foreword, and he did. He wrote a very nice forward and said some nice things, blah, blah, blah. But he spent an hour trying to convince me to change the name of the book. He said, you know, if you'd written the Book of Joy or the Book of Love or something, we'd understand it. But the Book of Context? And I patiently waited for him to tell me all the reasons. When he got done, I smiled and I looked at him. I said, Mort, the name is not negotiable. The name is the name. It's what it is, right? And then he got it and he laughed. So anyway, that's just a funny story about the book.
Well, actually, that makes the name of it makes sense to me. Like I,
Yeah, well, it didn't make sense to him, and it doesn't matter. That was the name, the book of context, right? So that's how it was given. So anyway, that was the end of the second of three conversations, and it was quite long, and it had many parts and all that like that. And the third day, we're back at the door, and I was really excited. I was buzzing with excitement. I was repeating all the stuff in my mind, that I learned and the framework and context and the things that I'd seen. I was just kind of like somebody sitting on one of those bouncy balls. I'm like
yeah.
buzzing, zzz, and I'm back at the door. And the third day was just one question again. He looked at me and he said, "Are you sure?" And I sort of almost like hyperventilated. I thought, "What do you mean? Am I sure? Am I stupid? Am I missing something? Am I biting off more than I can chew? What do you mean? Am I sure? Like what?" And so we talked about it from every possible angle. Am I biting off more than I can chew? Can I really do this? Am I missing something? All that stuff. And finally, after a while, I said, "No, I'm sure." And so he said, "Okay." And nothing was said about being done, but the conversation ended with a finality that I knew we were done. So that was the end of the conversation, the third one, the last one. And then some 14 days later, I came out of the coma. And the first thing I did when I came to was I was blubbering in my barely coherent state about context and telling the nurses and everybody all this stuff, right, that had happened. And I thought for sure they would think I was insane. But not really, because several days later, when I was leaving the ICU finally to go back to the regular part of the hospital, the infectious disease doctor that had been in charge of my treatment asked me, in all seriousness, he said, I need you to tell me what you saw. And I'd been blubbering about it now for days. And so I did. We talked about it and stuff like that. But apparently it was striking enough for him to ask that question and so forth. So that was the end of that experience. Um, by itself, there was an epilogue to that experience.
Well, before you get to the epilogue, let me ask some questions I got that are burning in my head because
Go for it. Dive in. We'll get to the epilogue later.
yeah, the suspense is the best gift you can give your listeners. But
All right. Well, there's an epilogue.
go, go, going back to the first day, when you were in this gray hazy place, there's only one door, right? There wasn't two. Like we're always told there's two doors when you go so that you have choices if you get a choice. But
Well, I did have choice: go through or stay back. I mean, the question was, do you want to come home? So I had choice. There was no question about that.
I mean, I guess okay. Maybe I should say three choices then. But not everybody gets the choice to come back. But at least from what we're told. And I mean, this whole story as an agnostic person, as an agnostic man, is just like stories like this blow me away. And it's just like maybe I should start considering things. I don't know, but
I'm not telling the story to convince anybody of anything. What it does for me, in the context of talking to you, is look. Every person breathing air knows that at times we feel this intuitive pull to do things, to follow a path, to do this or to do that. And sometimes, often we ignore it. I'd ignored those yearnings all my life up until 2007, when the divine intervention was so loud it was a 2x4, and it was really time to make a decision to change. And so the invitation, my experience is all the interactions with the divine are always issued in the form of invitations. Nobody's ever made to do anything. It's an invitation. I could have said no. Back when I got sober, I said yes. Uh, and so the element of agency is always, seems to be the rules of the framework, always allowed.
Hmm. So, but when you said no, I want to stay, did the possibility run through your head that maybe you only get one chance to get in there, and then that you're supposed to go in there, and that's it, and then after that, your chances are ruined?
No, and I'll tell you why. As a coach, when you do the profession as a coaching, or shrink, or any of those people that talk for a living, they talk about the concept, and they give it a name. It's called holding space. And that's kind of a woo-woo thing that means creating a safe place for things to be discussed, and right.
Yeah.
And so what I can say is I knew the question needed an answer, but never in any universe has there been space held like was in that place. It was benign, it was soft, it was there was an answer that needed to happen. And I had to say yes or no because,
Yeah.
they were busy jumping up and down on my chest and doing whatever. And so but it was not in any way threatening or negative. In fact, quite the contrary. Because of the whole religious discipline and beatings and all the crap I got, I'd always carried this feeling that the idea of meeting the divine, oh man, I was horrified. I sucked. I knew it. I'd been all this other stuff. And what was notable about the whole thing, I didn't even really think about it until later, about the whole experience was so remarkable because of the absence of any of that sort of feeling. It was just there, and there was a choice to make. It was an important choice, but it was a choice, and there were things to do either way. Do you want to come home? And
Yeah. Which,
so, and it was an opportunity for me to decide if I was done here or not.
yeah. Which, I mean, I have to think some people would gladly just say, I want to go home. Like, I'm done. I give up. Which I gotta say, your past, your childhood, the way you talk about it, reminds me of my best friend I lived with in New York for years before I moved to Massachusetts, and he had the same exact childhood as you, 6 or 7 brothers and sisters, and his father just was a merciful, abusive person, all in the name of Christianity. But
Mm-hmm.
so
Yeah, yeah.
I,
It's like we'll beat you, and later you'll thank me later. I mean, I actually heard that you'll thank me later and all that crap. Mm-hmm.
yeah, and his stories always made me just shudder. And hearing your story kind of just made me brought back that feeling for the first time since he died in 2018, 2019, somewhere around there. But he was going through a rough time as well at that point. He just passed, but in a house
Yeah.
fire, in a trailer fire. But anyway, I mean, it's just your story is just uplifting. And what was I gonna say? I mean, to have a conversation with anything like that, with any kind of divine being like that, is what every agnostic person, even atheist people, need to like. That's what they're looking for. Most of them that I know and that I've talked to about it, they're looking for that sign that someone actually cares and someone is there to listen and to hear things and to talk back to you.
Well, it's
Which,
certainly not something I ever expected, and certainly not something I ever felt I, deserved or anything like that. I don't think that has anything to do with it. At least that's not the impression I had. It felt like I'd had this thing 11 years before where I'd made a choice to radically change my life and to completely be a different person. I mean, like the person you see now and the person 15 years ago, right this minute, in June of 2007, were worlds apart. I was a wealthy, arrogant, selfish, addicted, everything, fill in the blank. And I accepted the invitation to simply radically change. It didn't do the work for me. I mean, I had to get sober. I had to do the thing. I had to talk to a million people. I had to do all the work. It wasn't done. Just like when this experience in the coma, I lost 35 pounds. I was so weak I couldn't walk. I couldn't get out of bed. When I first started trying to learn to walk again, I had to literally lift my legs out of bed with my arms. They still worked, but my legs didn't. When I stood up, I had to clutch this great big thing that looked like a tackling dummy on wheels to hold it and shuffle around the room. So I completely atrophied all my muscles in the 3 weeks I was gone, and I couldn't do anything. And so that didn't miraculously heal. I had to do the work to gradually recover. And I believe I've been blessed. I know I have, because when I left the hospital, I asked them. I'd always been in really good shape in my life. There was no time when I couldn't hit the floor and do 40 push-ups. I've been a martial artist, as second-degree black belt in a couple of styles, blah, 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 competitive stuff. So to be completely flatlined physically was scary. I was scared to death. So I asked the doctor later when I left the hospital, I said, well, will I ever get my lungs back? And he said two things. He said, your lungs have been so badly damaged. Number one, if you ever get an infection, a fever, not an infection. He said, if you ever get a fever, ever, it's 911 for you. You cannot have that ever again, anything. And number two, I asked him, well, will I ever get my lungs back? And he said, 2 years to never. So the work, and I feel like it's been 4 years now, and I'm blessed, and I'm physically healthy. I can do stuff. I can ride my bike. I can actually do things. So it's way better than I ever imagined it could possibly be, but I've done the work.
Yeah.
To get there. There was no magic about that to make any of that happen. So the invitations are what they are, but there's no royal road to anything.
No, of course not. And that's actually what I've been wanting to ask. Is I keep forgetting to ask it, but I just remember it now. Did they ever say what you actually had when you were?
Yes, that's why the days mattered. I said day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I went in the hospital on day 5, and the doctor told me later they didn't figure out what I had till the end of day 8, which was Monday. What I had was a necrotizing MRSA superbug in both lungs and in my bloodstream. And the doctor told me, like we talked with COVID, at 10% or 2% mortality rate, right? 2 to 3%.
Yeah.
He told me that the 10-day mortality rate of what I had was 100%.
Damn.
He said, so of course you died. I mean, it kills people. They didn't figure out what I had till the end of day 8. And by then all this had already happened. And when I got to the hospital and I did go code, and they stuffed me full of tubes and everything else, they didn't know what I had, but they put me on every antibiotic known to man. And I guess there's something called the antibiotic of last resort. I didn't know there was such a thing, but yeah, there is.
Either.
Google it. There is. It's called the antibiotic of last resort. Anyway, they had me on that and some other stuff in hopes of doing anything. I mean, I was gone. So yeah, that's why the days mattered. I didn't get to the hospital till day 5 in the progression of that, and it was necrotizing MRSA, antibiotic resistant superbug in both lungs in my bloodstream, and it was so aggressive that when they had tubes in my neck, it attacked the tubing, and they had to take the tubing out of one side of my neck, throw it all away, and start over and put it in the other side.
Yeah, I mean, necrotizing. I mean, necro, which is the Latin for death, is right there in the title. So, yeah, definitely, I would imagine that'd be definitely disease just by hearing the name of it. But
yeah, So
But
that's what it was. And all kinds of questions. Where did you go? And Eastern Europe, here, there, and everywhere. Because I wasn't contagious. It's very difficult to get. So it's not like transmissible easily. It's hard to get, and it's fatal.
do they do they ever have any idea where you caught it or?
I mean, I was in a bunch of Eastern European cities. We went to St. Petersburg, which of course will never happen again. But we went to Helsinki and Oslo and St. Petersburg and Tallinn, Estonia, which is on the northern part of the Baltic Sea, the Baltic states there, and
Yeah.
some other stuff. And we did all the sightseeing stuff in all those places. And, who knows?
Yeah, it could have been a lot of different places, but yeah, I've been on a lot of cruises when I was a child, but never got to go to Europe, and I was always a regret that I haven't gone there yet. But someday, maybe once all this craziness calms down. Which
Yeah.
brings me to my next question: How did so during COVID? I'm guessing you were pretty much shut in for a long time.
We have been. I haven't. Part of my coaching business is I speak. I traveled and did a lot of speaking before the near death, and I have after that also. But I spoke motivational speaking, conferences, that sort of thing, and I haven't done any of that for nearly 2.5 years since February. I do now have some speaking engagements the rest of this year, a couple in September and a couple in October. So I'm planning on starting that again, but I was running all my coaching business online before. I was using Zoom before anybody ever heard of it.
Yeah.
I was doing my coaching, but my clients are all over the world. I have clients in Australia, Mexico, Canada, US, Europe, all over the place. So
Yeah, that's an impressive roster for being a coach. That's for damn sure. And so all 3 times you were at the door, and after this question, I'll let you get to the epilogue. But all 3 times you were at the door, you never saw like what this creature looked like, right? This divine being. You never
I
saw.
absolutely saw what they looked like. They looked exactly like a person. I'm not saying that's the only manifestation the divine can have. Some people have asked, how did you know it was God? You just know those things. It didn't have a name badge on. Hi, my name is God. No, but you just had a sense and a knowledge that you were in the presence of the divine. It looked and then it didn't look like some old dude with a beard, but it was clearly in the form of a person, and it felt very familiar.
Yeah, it looked like Morgan Freeman.
No, it did not look like Morgan Freeman.
I always have to ask that when I have people that have met gods.
Totally, I get it, and I expect that, and it's a funny question. George Burns played Oh God, right? In the older movies, Oh God. But anyway, so no, but it was clearly in the manifestation of a person. It looked like a person. I was talking to a person, and it was clearly without speaking or name badges or anything. I was in the presence of the Creator, the divine, and there would be no hesitation in saying that.
Yeah, which that's why I didn't ask how do you know it was God, because I've heard enough of these from people I've interviewed just to hear them say like, it's just the way it is. Like
you just know.
Yeah. Which I mean, I also had someone on my podcast who met the devil 3 times, he believes. And he said the same thing for that. You just know. You get a sense. Which if I imagine it has to be true if you get a sense both ways. Like ultimate evil versus ultimate good is always going to be, you just feel it in your soul, like what's going on.
Well, we came from somewhere. We have an energetic essence. We know that the body is just a container. We just know that too, right?
Which, when you say that, the first thing you said, the first step, the first of 4 points you said was that we all come and we have a purpose, and we know that purpose, and we were excited about it before we came. Mm-hmm. Do you mean before we, like in the great beyond, before we're born, we know what the purpose is, or like an alien type way where we came from another planet?
How it's sent, the sense that I had is that we existed for I don't know how many eons as individuals, as who we are now. We were somewhere else before we were here. So we had, and as a spirit, as whatever that thing is. So let's just pretend that there's a spirit that's made out of something else that's in the body. And we feel that. Like if someone says, where's your consciousness? Well, you don't think of it being in your left kneecap. You know,
No.
we have a sense that it's somewhere, so we kind of know that. So that energetic essence was somewhere and had a period of time with the creator. And in that process, we developed and we were given an opportunity to come here, and we said, I want to go. And we were given gifts and a mission and purpose. And we said, I'm in, I want to go. I don't believe we were forced to come here. I think we chose it. And we were given the assignments, and I don't know why it was set up that we don't remember that really clearly. We just have these inklings that happened. We feel
Mm.
that things happened before and flashes and stuff. But the truth of that we were somewhere, we're gifts, we had a mission, we had a purpose. We knew each other. One of the things that happened with my wife, Joy, in that amazing experience, she knew, and she was not even a religious person. She was raised sort of Ukrainian Orthodox, and this Ukraine thing is really front and center for her, for us, because her dad was born in Odessa and she's Ukrainian, so first generation. But anyway, she said she knew to the core of her soul that this was hers to do, to accept that invitation to go with me and to help create this thing. And some people call it a soul contract, and some people call it whatever they call it, but that she knew that. And she
But
wasn't even like woo woo or weird or anything, but somehow she knew this is what I need to do.
which I mean, I am a high believer in fate. I believe we're destined to die at a certain point in life. We're destined to do certain things in life, and we just don't know it until it happens. I'm a huge believer in that, even if I'm not religious by any means. I'm a huge believer in fate, and I mean, a lot of times I do things that aren't the smartest because I say if I'm destined to die today, I'm destined to die today. I can't change that. So, I mean, yeah, my wife gets my case about that all the time, but
Sure.
tell me to slow down the highway. If I'm destined to die today, I'll die today. But yeah, and I had something I just thought of. What the? Oh well, the whole your whole explanation for that made me think of reincarnation in a way, because like we all like reincarnation just brings up the point that maybe once we pass in a previous life, our souls are sitting like in a waiting room, and the ones that want to go back out go back out. The ones that don't can just stay.
I'm not going to pretend to be knowledgeable or to have deep secrets about all that process. It's clear to me that we have had existence before this, whether it was here as another body, like some people talk about, or somewhere else in a spirit form. Like, I don't know. I'm not going to claim all that, but I know it's clear to me that we were somewhere, we had experiences, we brought them with us. We don't remember all of it, but there's continuity in that when this frame ends, we go somewhere else.
Yeah, which I I am also a believer in reincarnation because I am just because I've heard too many stories and like you can't debunk all these stories. Like some of them are just like, how would a kid know this about a past life? Like how would they know?
I agree. We were somewhere and we go somewhere. The form and shape of that, some people speculate we come back as people or animals or whatever. There's something to it. We have an energetic past and an energetic future.
Yeah, well, all I can say is I hope all those guys that hunt elephants and lions get to come back as antelopes in the prairie. But
For their turn. All right. Well, then, so the epilogue,
yes,
you've alluded to that. So I went home in July from the hospital, and I had to learn to walk again and all the rest. And by October, I'd written both those books, so I wrote them quickly. And then I went out to do some speaking, and I had 4 places to go speak in October, and it was hard because I could walk, but with struggle. And then in November, when I got back, I started to have back pain, lower back pain, and I'd been a very healthy person, but was still in recovery, and it just got worse and worse. And finally, on December the 5th, I woke up on the morning of December 5th, and I was paralyzed from the waist down. I got out of bed and fell on my face. I tried to get up on my hands and knees and fell on my face. And the only direction of motion that was available to me was down. So I crawled around on my hands, I'm not my hands and knees, but my arms a little bit. And Joy was there, and we're like, holy crap, what do we do? And finally we decided, I guess the only thing to do is call 911. So we called the paramedics, and they came, and I was in terrible pain and paralyzed. And so it's like, okay, I just 5 months ago, I got out of the hospital with this death experience, and like enough already, right? So nobody knew what was wrong. They loaded me in the back of the ambulance, and I'd never actually ridden to the hospital in an ambulance before. That was the first time. So we're on the way to the ambulance, and I'm in really bad pain, and I had this vision. And the vision was, I was like, it's one of those poker games. Like, after football games, sometimes they have the World Series of poker. Okay, it was like that. The room is kind of purpley, black, and lights and stuff. And I'm at a poker table with people, and it's first person. So I'm seeing through my own eyes. And there were people around it. And then I realized that the person right across from me was the Grim Reaper in full regalia. And I thought, I was terrified. I thought, holy crap. I'm on a stretcher, paralyzed from the waist down, in pain, having this vision, and then everybody else at the table just sort of faded. And I couldn't see the face. The hood was hanging, but there it is. And so you talk about knowing, like you just know. I thought, holy mother of God, there it is. And so, and then it's poker. I had chips, and I didn't see cards, but Reaper reached down and did that motion, the motion they do, and they push all the chips in the middle, right? And it just scared the daylights out of me. I thought, okay, what do you do if normally you'd say your adversary? But what came in my mind was, what do you do when the adversary raises the stakes? And what came to me is, well, if the adversary raises the stakes, you only have two choices: you fold or you call.
Yep.
And I was in pain. I couldn't move, but I raised my arm, the only thing I could move, and I slammed it on the stretcher as hard as I could and screamed at the top of my lungs, "Then I call!" And then it evaporated. And so what happened, and I went to the hospital, and they did a bunch of x-rays and an MRI, and then they sent the MRI to the surgeon that was on call, spinal surgeon, and he took one look at it and said, take him to the operating room. We're operating right now. So they took me from the ER to the OR. And what happened was that MRSA, necrotizing MRSA, had not been completely eradicated. So it had migrated into my spine and created an abscess about 4 inches long that had begun to calcify and was putting pressure on my spinal column. So it was between C2 and T1, which is clear up here at the top of the neck.
Yeah.
And had paralyzed me. So they operated, they did a laminectomy and cleaned it all out. And I left the hospital. It was December the 5th. I left on the 14th. So 10 days later. And I looked like Stegosaurus. I had this big bunch of really, really big and deep stitches up on my neck. And there's a big scar back there, a big groove, still like deep. But anyway, when I went back on the 27th, a couple of weeks later, to have the stitches out, the doctor looked at me and he said, shook his head and he said, I can't tell you. He says, I can tell you, I can count on less than one hand the number of people that have come into the hospital like you did and then walked out under their own power. He said, I don't know. So anyway, then they put a PICC line in. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's a line they put in under your right arm, and it goes through your veins and into your heart.
Mm-hmm.
And they do that to administer antibiotics that are too strong to put in anything else. So for 6 weeks, I had to carry around a pump.
which isn't fun at
Yeah,
all.
and so here's the reason that matters, and this goes back to what happened in the summertime. So I carried around a pump for 6 weeks, and they were pumping me full of crap to get this all out of me. So I went across the street from the hospital to get my first load of antibiotics after I'd gone home. And I went in there and I went to the outpatient pharmacy and I started to say who I was. I'm here to pick up my antibiotics. I got this pump and I blah, blah, blah. And I said, yeah, my name is. And the nurse, who I didn't know from anything, she looked at me and she said, oh, we know who you are. And I said, what are you talking about? And she said, oh, we know. And so they were referring back to the summertime,
Yeah.
what had happened. And so apparently what I said and what I told them was enough this is 5 months later. Like, oh yeah, we know who you are. And it just freaked me out, but it also humbled. It was emotional and I thought, holy crap. Okay. And it reinforced two things. One, that it was a serious choice. You want to come home? No, I'm staying. Well, that doesn't mean that whatever negative forces there are, call it whatever you want, aren't out to disrupt the plan.
Of course not.
Because this was all in. One more time. All in, right? And I thought, holy crap. And the doctor, I told you, he said, I just can't figure out whatever. And they knew. So that's the rest of the story. And that spawned a third book, not surprisingly named Walking Without Fear.
Ooh, you are good with names. I'll give you that.
All right. So that's the epilogue. And that happened 5 months after the original experience.
Wow. Stories like this they humble everybody because it's like you think you've been through stuff and you haven't been through anything like that in your life. Most people haven't, at least.
Well, I don't think there's anything special about me at all. I know that every single person, you and everybody else that listens to this, you're a divine being. You have gifts and talents. You have a calling and mission and purpose. I got hit with a 2x4 so I'd wake up and change my life. And my mission and purpose now for this year is I've said I'm going to help 10 million people in 2022 discover, develop, and serve with their divine gifts. And that's all I do. On your show, books I write, music I write, coaching things I do, summits I speak at, that's all it's about. Helping people understand who they really are and what's possible.
Yeah, and you said you have a podcast of your own too, right?
I do. It's called Your Ultimate Life, and I'm nearly on episode 700.
Oh my God.
Your Ultimate Life.
And on that podcast, you just do what you just described, basically, right? You try to help people find what their purpose is.
Yeah, I've defined it. Your ultimate life is the life of purpose, prosperity, and joy that you create by serving with your divine gifts. So I have some guests and I do some solo rants, but it's all focused on how to create that ultimate life by serving with your divine gifts. We're built to love and serve each other. We're not built to do anything else, and everything else we do is okay. You know, if you want to get rich or do this, fine, but we're built to love and serve each other. That's what we're built to do.
Well, I gotta say, you remind me of one of my co-hosts on one of my podcasts, Harvey Laguerre. He has a podcast called Men Are the Prize.
I know him. I don't think I've been on his show, but I think he's on my schedule. I have a gal that does this for me, and Men Are the Prize rings a bell. Ding, 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 ding.
I was gonna say, because if you haven't been on a show, you really should. It seems like it'd be right up your alley too.
Well, then great. Men Are the Prize. I think that's on the schedule somewhere.
I'll have to ask him in the group chat when I get off this. I'm sure, because I feel like he was on your comment on the post about you as well as like I did. So I think we both got you at the same time. But wow, I mean, your story is miraculous, and I am so honored to hear it and to be able to put it out there in the world. 100%.
Thank you for the work you do. Thank you for the good that you're doing. And I want to assure every one of your listeners that you're important. And no matter what's happened to you before, it's never too late to have a big impact and to do something good, to matter as you choose to live into your divine purpose. It's never too late.
Well, there you go, listeners. A good lesson for today. And this episode will be dropping in a week and a half on the 29th. So it's going to be one of my bonus episodes because I am booked up through September for my regular episodes. But bonus episodes I like to release for my listeners just to give them a little something extra every once in a while. Because you You gotta do good things for your listeners if they're willing to give time and help you raise yourself in the world.
Absolutely.
100%. But and I love it. And I thank you for having you on, Kellan. It was an amazing time.
You're welcome. And if anybody wants to see anything, I have a gift, but it's about fear. So live without fear. Livewithoutfear.ca. There's something there about learning to live without fear, if that's of interest to anyone.
And I meant to ask this. Have you ever considered possibly selling movie rights to your life? Like, because your story would make one hell of a movie.
You know, I've been told that before, and I have never pursued it. So, like, try to write the screenplay or even talk to someone about it. But it would. There's certainly, you know, the kinds of things that life I lived before and the change and everything. Absolutely, it would be interesting and fun. But the answer is not yet.
Oh, well, I have a few ideas for actors that could play you easily, but Michael Keaton, maybe Michael Keaton. I could see that. Though he had the same face almost in a way. I mean, I could see it, but I'm not going to get into that because that'll bring me down a rabbit hole. That'll take an hour of me talking about movies. But I thank you for being on. And is there any other socials or anything else you want to give to listeners?
You know, with a name like Kellan Flukiger, you can't hide. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Amazon. I've got 16 books. Google me. There's thousands of references because of my executive career and my coaching stuff. With the website, I had no trouble getting my website. There was no competition. There are only 2 Kellan Flukigers in the world, and the other one's my son. So
I was going to say that.
My website, any way you want to connect, please do. I'd be happy to have a conversation and see how I can help you.
Well, great to hear. We got a good man here, folks. Feel free to reach out to him if you think you need his help, which I'm sure a lot of us do, actually, because I know I, for one, could use all the help I can get. So
thank you.
All my listeners, go to the Paranormal, the New Normal Facebook group, and you see me post all my 5 podcasts there. So, and every podcast I guest on, which is usually a couple weekly. So I am a busy man. But thank you for listening, and I will see you in a couple days when the episode releases on Saturday.